Hey, it's Lloyd Lobo, right? Do I say your name right?
Yeah, you got it. It's Lloyd Lobo. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I was just coming in your hat. That's why I wanted you to repeat that. That's first of all, I thanks for taking time again. But big guy, when we chatted last a few weeks ago, I didn't know how famous you were. I looked
No,
you
I'm
up.
not famous. You're
You
too
are
kind.
you are hugely famous. I was looking at you actually on my car, and when I was at stoplight, and I'm like, oh my god, you are a podcaster, and then you mentioned your hat. So tell me.
Yeah, I've had a very long-standing podcast. I wrote a book on community-led growth, which became a Wall Street Journal bestseller within the week of a launch. It was all about community. So when I built my last business, it was built on the principles of community. We got to 10 million annual recurring revenue without having a marketing team. It was just me and hosting a lot of events with partners and conferences and podcasts and things like that. And I think the company was less than 30-ish people at 10 million with a large community of 100,000 subscribers. We never called our community the same thing as our company. Our company was called Boast AI, and the community we call traction because we sold to entrepreneurs. And what do entrepreneurs always want? It's traction. What do VCs want? They want traction. And that it's funny. It's a funny story. When we started the company, we were cold calling and cold emailing and getting nowhere. And we're like, listen, let's just sell. We built an AI enabled tax incentive company. US and Canada gives billions of dollars in research and development tax credits, which is refundable to anyone building new products or improving existing products. In Canada, you can get 64% cash back on your product development spend. In the US, it's 10%, 10 to 20%, depending. And that's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Imagine getting even 100,000 cash back. It's direct to your bottom line. To get 100,000 to sell a million, right? Most companies make no money, no profitability. So it's just we weren't getting anywhere selling to people who weren't like large enterprises, manufacturing, etc., because they were working with the big four accounting firms. And who are these two guys, engineers, startup guys, saying we're going to use AI to automate this stuff? Nobody believed us. And this is before AI was cool. And so we started then selling to our own kind startup founders. And we said, you know what? How do we get a hold of these people? They want traction. So we started hosting meetups and events, bringing entrepreneurs together and bringing a speaker on a specific tactical topic.
That was
And
that was like real face to face meetups.
I'm a big believer in face to face, man. Anytime you incorporate more than two senses, you start to build genuine connections. We're now sound and sight. If we were in person, it would be taste, touch, smell, and the bonds get stronger. That's why Harley Davidson is an iconic brand. CrossFit, High Rocks now. A lot of these, even Nike is starting with these Nike studios, right? Red Bull built a huge cult like brand on in person events around energy, right? Sponsoring these sporting events. And so there's something to be said about different senses when you come together. And
Right.
so we started hosting these meetups at our co-working space that we bartered for a free space at. And 10 people showed up the first time, but we did it with such cadence, like every couple of weeks and then every week eventually. And one day, 200 people showed up at the co-working space. And so we had to hack together the chairs and rent a projector and so on. And then the co-working space's GM is like, dude, this is not a conference center. You like literally hijack the whole co-working space to host your meetup. And that evolved into the Traction Conference. And we've had everyone from like the CEOs of Uber to president of Atlassian, so on. The who's who had come. But this was before like digital was huge. Everyone's anchoring on now digital platforms, right? Like Instagram and LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's a great place to build social proof and thought leadership, and the bigger deals get done there. We never posted anything on Instagram or even podcasts because we're like face to face, our average deal sizes are north of 20,000 a year. It's a huge trust factor because what we would do is plug in their technical systems like their Jira, their GitHub, whatever project management systems, and plug in their financial system, their bookkeeping, their payroll. and we would create the reporting required to file for these tax incentives. So it's huge trust, right? You're giving me your IP. And so the face-to-face was really important, especially in a high ACV. I can say any number of things on Instagram and stuff. And I think our audience wasn't on Instagram at the time. So we built this huge in-person community. And every year we'd host conferences and then meetups in different cities. And then one thing led to the other. One day we got to 10 million ARR around the same time. En route to that, a growth equity firm acquired 52% of the company. It was, it's funny because when they looked at our margins, it was pretty high. And they looked at our marketing spend was super low. And they're like, how are you getting these customers? I'm like, this event where you met us is how we get through events. And the events always end up being cash flow positive because you get sponsors and people pay for tickets.
Right.
And so it's the marketing channel that became cash flow positive for us. And so that's the story. And then as an afterthought, we started releasing all the conference sessions on the podcast. Really, we weren't a podcast first. So now people see the hat and they recognize it from the Traction conference. And very recently, I did a sort of mini podcast series, 10-part, called Unicorn Porn.
Yeah.
So it's unicornprn.com and you can see it, but it's shot very high def in a studio. And the episodes are titled like Venture Capital is a Giant Ponzi Scheme.
That's
Founder.
Total clickbait.
A lot of clickbait stuff. And we break it down. Like, it's just like making fun of the lives we live. One of the sessions is called, one of the podcast episodes is called Founder of Fraudster, Con Artists in the Boardroom. These hires will kill your company.
Oh.
Shit VCs say, hey, culture fit is BS. Wait, there's a logical explanation for everything when you listen to it. Like, culture fit is BS is all about how it's become a euphemism for keeping people out and the bro culture and like just hiring people who are like you, right? Which happened a lot pre-pandemic, and then pandemic rolled around and we're still dealing with the after effects of that, like finding good talent. But unlimited beers on tap, valuations were at an all-time high. COVID boom led to interest rates being down, companies seeing this massive artificial growth, which was really driven by the Black Swan event and not really the market exploding. And so talent wars, unlimited XYZ, and then 2022 rolled around and the market started to correct itself.
Yeah.
And the 1,500 or so unicorns that were created in those 2 years, a lot of them are like quiet shedding and markdowns, and whatever is left is probably getting annihilated by AI native sort of lean companies that are coming out, right?
So a couple of points. So the original start in the Canada, a couple clients up there, and they've mentioned that tax incentive, which is ginormous. That was basically a cash influx to you on the books. But the question I have for you is, by the way, was that one of your first gigs that you hit it big with, or were there things before? There's your kid.
It's like running by. I'm still trying to figure out my new spot.
No, I think it's great. I think that's totally perfect. No, but
it wasn't the first thing. So I graduated university engineering in 2005, software engineering. Our undergrad, me and my Boast AI co-founder were partners in every project all through university. Our undergrad project or thesis was collision avoidance on real-time objects. I didn't code, he coded it. I was the front man doing the presentations and everything.
You were the Jobs, he was the Wozniak.
I was the storyteller. I don't know, Jobs or Woz or whatever, but we worked well together. And then my wife, now girlfriend at the time, was in med school and was in New Jersey and getting into med school. And I started applying to startups there. And I got a job with a startup. And what's really interesting is when you finish engineering, everyone applies for engineering jobs. I actually started applying to sales jobs because I asked most entrepreneurs, like, hey, if I wanted to be an entrepreneur, what's the best skill? And everyone's like, selling. You got to sell. You got to convince your wife that's a sales job. I'm not going to bring money. You're going to convince investors, customers. You barely have a product, employees to work on low pay. So I started just applying to jobs, and every large company, they don't want to hire you. They're like, why why would you want to do sales? You just graduate. You're either a shitty engineer and now you're going to be a shitty salesperson.
I have to say, that went through my mind when you first said that. I'm like, the bottom of his class. No, I'm sure you're top of your class, but
Oh no, I wasn't. So I didn't even finish high school, but it's a whole different story. I didn't finish high school. I finagled myself into engineering, sheer luck. But that one startup that I applied to a university for a sales job, he needed cold callers. It was like seed stage start in 2005. So I took the job cold calling. And so one of my key lessons at the time was if you really suck at something, best way to get it is to put yourself in an environment that forces you to do that something over
oh
and
yeah,
over again. With
yeah.
And so I was like with four other cold callers, I sucked. They were great. And I just learned by osmosis.
You
And I
learn,
got better.
yeah, but let's face it, you had the grit to stay there and deal with the failures that come in your way, and you kept looking beyond it. So don't undersell yourself. You are very much like Jobs. He sat in, learned that way. But so the other question I had for you with that before you continue on that startup thing was the bigger pop, which I guess is what you're alluding to with the initially the meetup strategy. Did you scaled as you needed, right? You didn't
Yeah.
build capacity in advance, which a ton of startups failed by doing that. And so you were just in time, right? Is that
There was this movie. I don't know what it was. I forget the movie name, but there was a quote in there, build it and they will come. That never happens.
Fields and Dreams? Terrible, that quote. Yeah, there's no such thing. You have the best product, and I've mentioned a few times. If you build it in vacuum, whatever, it's the best product ever. But if no one knows about it, you're dead. And so, the sales and marketing to me has always been like the most important thing. And sounds
That
you
hit that from day one, but I have this now a different view. The next startup I do, because a lot of what we do is we validate and we build and then we chase. The next startup, I don't want to be a momentum start. A momentum meaning you're chasing fine customers, creating noise. I want to build a gravity company. And that means for me, that is network effect, right? Look at 70% of all value in tech has been created by network effects companies, whether it's the
yeah.
telephone, the mobile, the internet, instant messaging, social networks. And so I'm thinking through that concept. How do you build a gravity company? How do you build a product? So you still need to seed it because a lot of these social networking or network effects companies or marketplace companies, they have this cold start problem. You have to get a critical mass of a tribal niche and then they get enough value and they bring people. But I keep thinking that, but that's not quite build it and they'll come. Like Airbnb, they didn't really build it and people came. They went out there.
Right.
Even Uber did. They seeded it, and then you have enough hooks and mechanisms in place, then gravity starts to take place.
Talking about your gravity approach and network approach, obviously you need to have good product concept or service concept and demonstrable and that sort of thing. It's got to be real. I'm not a fan of this vaporware BS stuff. Some people don't mind doing that, but no, I like to have something of substance. But what's curious to me, since you're a formal engineer and you've been in the AI world, AI is a whole nother thing because a lot of the technology's been around for years. I know I used a lot of it in the 80s and 90s. And the computer power then was there. The content wasn't, and content's king. We need that. But there was something that changed. And where do you think the network effect was for like Sam Altman and others to really get that AI vision understood where even anyone can use it?
You know what's really interesting is if you look at the Bay Area, right? There were a lot of people, sharp, bright, pedigreed folks like Sam,
Yeah.
building foundation models. We at Boast had one of the early access, beta access to OpenAI before ChatGPT was a thing. I think it was 2019 or so. So because initially to do these R&D incentives, we were creating our own models because we had so much historical customer R&D project data and claim data. And then we started to play with GPT and others like Cohere, which has raised a lot of money, Canadian company. And then ChatGPT came and it changed the game. And I think like it's always these consumer products that give you the opportunity to get huge volumes of data, right? Huge if the network effect takes place. Now, from see, luck and risk are two sides of the same coin. The ones that get lucky are the ones that keep flipping risk. But at some, it's maybe UX brilliance, it's timing, it's a combination of things. But the way ChatGPT came out and it just exploded, and that was sharp UX thinking, consumer thinking from the OpenAI team, and that just exploded. I think without ChatGPT, the world wouldn't have experienced what it would be like to use an AI model in the day-to-day functionality. To me now, it's like brushing your teeth. There are two things that's very interesting when you observe, when you look at a network effect, right? There's a few concepts. One is this concept by Nir Eyal called Hooked: How to Build Addictive Products. I applied it to community and I wrote about it in my book as well. And Hooked is, I guess, that's how even like addiction to drugs starts, right? You have a trigger, whether it's external or internal, but there is a trigger. A friend comes and says, "You got to try this. You got to try cocaine, man. Come on, let's do it." You're a teenager in school, and then you take a hit, right? So trigger action, and then you get a variable reward. The reward is not fixed. So every time you go to if it's a penny, you're going to stop. But if it's a penny sometimes, and if it's $1, sometimes it's a 10,000, you're going to keep going back and forth, right? And so then you get this trigger action variable reward, and then you get invested. And invested meaning I'm going to try it again, or I'm going to send it to my friends. I'm going to use it more. And eventually what happens is that external trigger, which could be a push notification or your buddy tapping you on your shoulders, turns into an internal trigger. And you should think about like products that started out as external triggers that are now internal triggers for you. They go through that same pattern. If you look at Instagram, doom scrolling is perfect, right? Example of this is you got a notification, you went in, you saw this reel, and then you go to the next one and the next one. It's not a fixed reward. It's not the same reel. It's a variable reward. And then you get more and more invested. And now it's like you're 2 hours in, and it's 4 a.m. and you haven't slept, right? And so when you look at ChatGPT, there's concepts of that, right? Every time you communicate, there's a trigger, you take the action, you get a variable reward, and then you get more and more invested. And then as a part of that investment, there's two other things that's happening. And one is the concept of accruing benefits. And the second one is the concept of mounting loss. The accruing benefits is the more I use the product, the more relevant it gets to me. Like the answers get more relevant. Now, because I played with Grok and others, but I've used ChatGPT for so much longer and the model's gotten so much better that I don't like when it's tailored, when it's supposed to be, if it's generic, sometimes Grok's better. But if it's tailored to me, I feel like Grok's off. And I just like the context and the tonality that I've developed with ChatGPT. I follow this guy on Instagram called Dr. Curses. It's like a faceless account. And so I've trained my ChatGPT to talk to me like Dr. Curses.
That's cute.
So now I'm like, it's taken a long time. And so like, I don't want to have to redo that. And so there's this accruing benefits. And then the second one is mounting loss, which is the more I input in there, the harder it is for me to leave because it's like a switching cost. So it's this hook. And then it's the concept of mounting loss and accruing benefits. And some products actually just by sheer function of having no competition and being excruciatingly shitty have this stickiness through mounting loss, like Salesforce.com. And then build this cottage industry of apps to make Salesforce more usable. I think that changes in the future, but Evernote was like that. Evernote was a good product, but people had this mounting loss, right? They didn't want to leave Evernote.
So
Stuff was in there.
It aligns well biologically. It's basically a dopamine response, always wanting more and getting invested, right, in that. But I see you graduated in 05, so you're still a baby by comparison. Oh, crap. So I remember in the 90s when Google first made its like submit your site URL thing available to a small group of people. And it was really early days to them. And they demonstrated to Actually, one of my investors in one of my early entities, the guy who wrote the first check to Google, Andy, he just saw the search ranking stuff. He knew that there was something there, right? And so it was valuable there. But getting that first link out to people to add content, it was just a small group of people, I think, analogous to maybe the Facebook Harvard network thing. So you get a core of like champions so that just could become dopamine addicted and be your voices out there to get other people to become aware of it. And so that's the thing that I'm curious about. Not just obviously ChatGPT might have had something similar. You were early in, right? Early into ChatGPT. Was there just a small core of people who got access before the world became aware?
It wasn't a small group of people. It was a lot of people because I was in the Slack group with like thousands of people.
Okay.
And I think they were training their models on all these people's data. They just gave open access. They gave access to open their API. Sorry.
That's thousands is small. That's still small. I mean, it wasn't like suddenly they made it available to millions of people to start.
It was thousands of people, but thousands of people with lots of data, and they expanded and expanded. And it came to me through a friend whose company I was an investor in.
Huh?
And it's very funny because they started out as a marketplace, AI powered marketplace for content creators.
Uh-huh.
And today it's evolved into the only licensed video model. It's called Moon Valley. They've raised like almost $500 million from Khosla and Bessemer and General Catalyst. But talk about pivoting. And this was 2020 when I invested. And they made the leap from marketplace for content writers to then giving AI tools for content writers. And then Jasper floated out of nowhere. And then these guys went all in on video. And now Moon Valley is being used by Hollywood studios for fully licensed model based on licensed content, video model based on fully licensed.
Nice. But so if you think back to the early Slack channel, it was like walking into a room of junkies where you had a little 8-ball or something and you're trying to get them addicted to Coke or something. Because they were already...
A lot of developers.
Yes, exactly. And so they were engaged anyway. And so are these things that you think about in terms of your sort of on your next gig or your next venture?
I think, sorry, go on.
Where do you deploy initially to get the room of junkies?
I think that really matters, right? So when you look at, in many ways, OpenAI was a community-led growth model, right? It may not be that, yes, they do events and all of that stuff right now, but it started with a small group of people that were a very specific niche, trying to get things done better, faster, cheaper. There were AI enthusiasts that were early to the movement, and they made them feel special and brought them together. I think that's really important. Everyone says, go big TAM, all of that stuff. But building any successful venture is a long freaking slog. You always have the opportunity to hit a bigger TAM. The TAM always grows. But much like Facebook, right? They started with Harvard.
Right.
And they expanded to other universities. I still remember because I went to university in Canada and they hadn't opened up to Canada. And my wife was in New Jersey and she got access at Rutgers. And I'm like, why can't I get access to this Facebook thing? And I'm like, oh, but that was a strategy, right? They create this FOMO, they make it special for a small group of people, then they keep expanding. I think over time, though, when you try to become everything to everybody, you lose that magic, that special sauce. And I think the niche is really important. Companies like OpenAI have the opportunity to create many sub niches and build massive communities given the value it's providing.
Actually, you mentioned Canada a few times. I'm curious about your background. You told me some really interesting stories a few weeks back, but did you move first to Canada or were you where? And then tell me your story.
Oh man, I got a very complicated story. So I was born in Kuwait. I was a refugee of the Gulf War in the 90s. And it was a very interesting experience. My parents are not from the Middle East. My parents were born in India. In India was a small place in India was colonized by the Portuguese,
Uh-huh.
and hence the last name Lobo is comes from there. So I don't know what the mix is, but yeah, my parents come from India, and there's Portuguese influence in the last name. And I think the Portuguese moved to India before they did Brazil, and they left India out. They stayed in India longer than they stayed in Brazil. But what's really interesting is Brazil until today has a huge Portuguese influence.
Huh.
It's
Did not know that.
Portuguese. But in India, Goa was colonized by the Portuguese till the 60s. But that influence, like people are not speaking Portuguese there. It's gone. It does feel different when you go to Goa. There's a lot of Portuguese architecture and things like that. But yeah, these last names like Lobo and D'Souza and Montero, they all emanated from Portuguese influence.
So how old were you when you left Kuwait?
I was 9, maybe, or 10, something like I can't remember. In nine, yeah, I was 9. 9, I think I was 9. And what's really, as a kid, I'm pretty sure I had some ADD. An
Oh,
ADD.
really? I
all,
went at it.
all
It's never
entrepreneur. So
left you.
yeah, I just never left it. And so I would always study last minute. Hated studying. I just hated reading. And so even till today, I have to write and listen for me to pick up stuff, which I do a lot. And so that's why writing my book was really hard. But nonetheless, I'd study last minute, and I studied for math exam. Show up, it was geography. I think I was in grade 4 or 5. I'm like, fuck, I'm gonna fail. And my parents are gonna kill me if I fail fourth grade. And then summers roll around, and before the results come, my mom wakes me up one morning and she's, I don't think we can go back to school. We have to evacuate. We have to leave the country. Kuwait's been hit by a war. Iraq's invaded. My first reaction is, yes, you're never going to
Oh,
find
that's a big snow day to those of us in this huge snow day, right?
Yeah, I'm like, you're never going to find out.
Yeah, no exams, right?
No, you're never going to find out I failed the grade, basically, because before the results came, that happened. Because I did the exam and then I studied for math, showed up, it's geography. I was failing. So you're never going to find out I failed a grade.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. And then when reality sank, there was no help. Everyone had left. The military in Kuwait was compromised. And so all the key people had left. And so everyone was left to their own. They made a movie on this, and that movie was accurate as best as I can remember. And so what ended up happening is the country was rescued by the community. It was like the biggest community-led effort to to evacuate a country from a war. And every building, I still recall, my dad went down. And what's the community really? You stand around, you look around, and you're like, you have a problem. Everyone's, yeah, I have the same problem. Let's get together and solve it. So he went down the building. He saw other people. They're all distressed. And immediately they got into problem solving. Okay, I'll guard the building from 6 to 12 or 6 to 9. And you guard it from 9 to 12. And like they started project managing, coming up with plans and strategizing. I'll organize food supply. I've got extra room because my family went on vacation and now they can't come back. So if you've got displaced family members, I've got room here. My dad was a chef at a hotel, so he had a lot of extra food. And so every building, apartment building, in Kuwait is a lot of apartment buildings more than anything, became a sub community and then would communicate with the next building and the next building and the next building. And then that voice went to governments, embassies and governments, and turned into a huge movement to evacuate people, coordinated with the UN, etc. It's unbelievable the way things happened, because it wasn't like the war hit and there were plans to evacuate people overnight. None of that. It took a while, but it didn't belabor for 6 months. I think we were out of there in 30, 45 days. I can't remember. Under 2 months for sure.
So it's interesting. There are a couple things that I've heard are like key components towards future success, and trauma. And you clearly had a lot of it in that war zone situation. Also, a personal, I don't call it a deficiency, but call it, you said you're ADD and you reading and having to write things down. There's something and like dyslexia, it's a common thing. But often what you don't hear, and I think this is a key secret sauce for you, is the community element, right? And that was all there, right? The trauma, the personal challenges, and community. And it seems like you've formulated and leveraged that for a lot of the gigs that you've had moving forward. So is that fair to say, or have I missed
I
something?
think that's accurate. You know what's funny is I never looked at it as trauma.
More so, it's not trauma. You heard
It, people think I'm lying or
no.
I'm fibbing or whatever, but genuinely, my parents have been very abundance minded in the circle I grew up in. And so they never made me feel like I had anything less. I kid you not, man. That my memory of that whole experience is the most memorable extended camping trip ever.
Oh my
I
God.
kid you, I kid you not. As we were going on this rickety bus from Kuwait to Baghdad to Jordan, we lived in refugee camps for a long time, couple weeks here and there, right? And the UN had helicopters dropping like canned tuna and pita bread. We were playing like soccer and it's just extended camping trip. You don't have to go to school. You're hanging out with the people you know and love and respect, and you're having fun. You're a 9-year old, like you don't know better. And what's really interesting is as I was going on that bus, now most people would be crying, right? Adults, because think about it. Currency is invalid. You don't know if you're going to live or die.
Right.
And if you see pictures of the highway of death on which the bus went, bodies are bombed all over the place, right? You don't know where you're going to go. You don't know if you're going to live or die. Your currency is invalid. What is your state of mind going to be? You're going to probably be depressed, crying, miserable. I kid you not, man. Everyone on my bus was like singing and laughing and playing the guitar, singing Bollywood music, English songs. And that's how I processed it as a kid because of that experience. And one funny incident happened then. Every bus had sort of ration marked and they had their own like color coding. And so on our bus, I think water was white cans and gasoline were like red cans or something or black. And I dragged, and we were all in like lines for buses, right? Outside our buildings. And we had our supplies. And my uncle tells me, okay, help me bring some of the stuff. Like we're all helping. So I dragged this huge canister, like this, like maybe 10-gallon thing, like big, drag it. As soon as we get to the first campsite, everyone's tired. My uncle's, okay, let's set up a bonfire. I'll make tea. That's what brown people like to do, drink tea. And he pours that water in this massive vessel to make tea. And the whole thing caught fire and one of the tents burned. And I realized I had dragged a red can, which meant gasoline, but for us, it was water. But that was the experience. And if I had to look back, and it actually became one of my key theses in life and how I live, that it's neither the destination nor the journey. It's the companions that matter the most. You might be on a crappy journey on the way to hell, but great companions will make it memorable. You are not the average of the people you hang around with. You are the outcome of their habits. And so you either upgrade your circle or you downgrade your potential. The people you hang around with matter immensely. And actually there was this Harvard study, which they ran for 85 years. And they said the number one predictor of long-term well-being is not money and it's not working out. It's your relationships.
Community. And so that was the big insulator. While people were singing on the bus, that community protected you from that, otherwise looking out the window and seeing the corpses. But that's why I say that's like a secret sauce, a superpower. And even as you spoke earlier about maybe your next thing that you want to have gravitational and network effects, that's community again. But as we talked about, you have to start small and focused. And I'm curious, as you're looking to your next thing, what areas you want to go after? I know I personally am into like the fitness thing, and I know you are, but also preemptive health to avoid getting into disease states. That's my passion world. What's the kind of area you want to go after next?
Similar. So what's really interesting now, I turned 45 this year. When we sold a majority of Boast, I saw financial freedom for the first time. Until then, my wife was paying most of the bills at home. She's a notable physician, senior physician at Stanford on the leadership. She was on the leadership team. She's a professor of medicine there. And so she was paying the bills, living in the Bay Area. When I started the company, she was a resident making nothing, and I was on EI. And the reason why I decided to do my own startup was two things. One, again, your environment. If you recall, I said my first job was cold calling for a startup. Then my next job was doing sales and product also for a startup. I say sales and product because I joined another early stage startup and they said you'd be doing sales, but really there was no product. So it was talking to customers, figuring out what to build, tell the devs. So doing a combination of everything. So being like this Renaissance sales rep. And so most of my career, 3 jobs had been working for seed stage startups at the intersection of product and GTM. And I leveraged community and meetups a lot, like around those niches. And then I said, like, all these venture-backed seed stage startups, they had copious amounts of funding and they all died. So I may as well take a risk and go in on my own. And my university best friend, Alex, had the idea for Boast because he was doing R&D tax incentives for a big four very manually. And he said, man, let's automate this stuff, right? And so it was easy. I had understood the risk profile working for other founders. That was my environment. So it's very easy. It's a stretch usually for people outside because they see it as a huge risk. But if you're in that environment all the time, then it's easy. That's why a lot more entrepreneurs come out of the Bay Area. And she was paying the bills. And then for the longest time, we worked on a couple startup ideas. We did it automatically, which was a chatbot in 2013 that failed. I worked on a VC incubated startup in the AI enabled sales assistant space. It was Speakeasy in 2015, which also failed. And then Boast was going on in parallel, which ended up doing well, right? And unexpectedly, of course, like I didn't expect to have the outcome we did. And what ended up happening was a couple of weeks after that outcome and the wire hitting my bank, I almost died. My lungs collapsed. So as an entrepreneur, you put your business first. If people treat their business like they treat their bodies, businesses would be bankrupt, basically. Right. Like you're running on carbs and cortisol and caffeine 24/7. And when you're in this high stress, you really don't get sick. And when you take a breather, that's when it happens. And so I finally took a breather. We booked a trip for the whole fam, extended fam, to Bora. And 2 days before Bora, I'm in the hospital, unable to breathe. I got bilateral COVID pneumonia. And that's when I realized, man, I had been so focused on the business that I forgot about my health. And if I were to die today, literally I'm leaving behind trust fund babies, right? Yeah. And so then I went on this journey of transformation, moved to Dubai for a couple of years, focused on health, hired the best trainers, nutritionists, started taking regular blood work, testing body fat, VO2 max. And then not too long ago, I had another incident. I'm like, you know what, maybe I should do another startup. And it's just going back into the old way of working. Right. And I started to see immediate impact on my health. So I'm like, you know what, one thing I'm most passionate about, my way of living is so integrated with fitness, with wellness. Why not I build something in wellness, right? Every elite athlete has a team of nutritionists, trainers, mental health therapists, resilience coaches, etc., to shave a few seconds off their sprint time. And what is the work span of an athlete? It's 10 years. And entrepreneurs spend all their life chasing this, trying to create impact for the world. Yes, they make money at the end of it, but en route, they're trying to create impact, change the world. And they piece it together on carbs, caffeine, and cortisol. And then eventually they burn out. I know so many entrepreneurs who've failed and are mentally and physically broken. And so, how do you empower an entrepreneur to perform like an elite athlete? Because the reaction time is important, the stress management, all of these things. That doesn't exist. Healthcare, as we both know and the world knows, is broken. It's sick care, right? Biohacking, longevity, these are things for people who have the money and the time, right? When you're working nonstop, how do you make sure you train your mind and body to perform at peak? The next project I work on definitely is going to be in the healthcare space. I want to build healthcare for high stakes entrepreneurs. Call it
So
like
that's
high performance healthcare.
yeah, now that's awesome. So especially in the era of the solopreneur, because your TAM is going to be increasing, right? But focus initially on that small core group of people, as we talked about earlier. But what are you thinking in terms of platform? What, not technology, but what do you see would be in this sort of equation for this preemptive or proactive health?
I
What do you
think
think?
one of the first things, like we do in business, right? You got to understand the state of affairs. You got to understand the metrics. So what is going on? Like in the business, let's look at any SaaS business, right? How does the value of your business increase over time? It's growth rates. There's NRR, GRR, there's gross margin, there's profitability, right? There's a balance sheet, there's an income statement. You need that for your personal life, right? Like
Or
for
you
your
measure
for your
measurement?
health.
Yeah,
So I
measurement.
think the diagnostics is important, certain biomarkers. And honestly, this frustration started with insurance driven healthcare. I went to my primary care physician and asked for a bunch of biomarkers. And she said, why? I said, because. And then I fought her on it. She gave me the test. And then she's like, this is off, that is off. And I'm like, how are you benchmarking these? And that's when I realized insurance pays these people like $50 a visit and they got to see 30 of them. And they're not invested in your health. They're not a partner. It's a very transactional relationship. It's not a community. It's not a partnership. And so then I signed up with a concierge physician who I just text now. And that experience is not optimal, but it's better because my wife's a physician. So that's great. I get that help. I have a concierge physician. And so I started using all these other tools, like the testing tools. I went to Ezra today to do a 360 MRI. I've done a genetic test. I've done the gut biomarkers, VO2 max, which fortunately is great. I think my VO2 max was considered excellent for a 45-year-old. Now so now that I understand my VO2 max is excellent for a 45, it was 50, the VO2 max. And so I'm like, how do I make it 65, which is considered elite for a 20-year-old?
Right.
But if you don't understand these metrics, you don't know what you're pushing, your body fat. So take all these biomarkers. Once you have these biomarkers, then you add on your lifestyle to it. Like, how do you eat? How do you work? Your sort of ancestry, your history, right? And then you can come up with a very personalized plan, which combines cognition, exercise, cardiovascular, and nutrition and supplementation to optimize you proactively, not optimize to live longer, but optimize you for peak performance in the boardroom and the bedroom.
Okay, so here are a couple things. So on the diagnostic side, I'm sure you're aware, there are several companies.
Yeah.
Function Health is a great example because you hear Hyman talk about this a lot. I'm a Function Health member. I'm also Inside
I
Champ,
am.
right?
I am too.
I do the blood draws. Like I've got 20 vials coming out of me every 3 months. But you have to realize that the data that they metric against are largely from people who are producing, they're sick because they've gone to their doctors. So that sort of the baselines are all off anyway. And so even Hyman says this with Function Health is that these are health forward people, people who want to take blood to test where they are. And even they are just like out of what would be reasonable ranges from his perspective. I totally agree with that. So you have to build a good data set for those diagnostics to actually be useful. And so I like the idea of having a core group of people that are actually pretty driven, but they are living a lack of sleep and coffee and all the wrong things. So they might not be the best group to collect the data from, but they're a good group to go to initially for this platform. But where do you think or what would be a good strategy, you think, to collect a good quality set of data that you could benchmark off of?
See, you need to have a hypothesis and stick with it for any study, right? And you basically need to have a point of view. And
Right.
my point of view is an entrepreneur is an athlete, period. An entrepreneur is an athlete. The way they operate is very similar to an athlete. They need quick reaction times. They need to be resilient. They need to play the long game. They need to keep pushing forward. So an entrepreneur is an athlete, right? And I saw this with myself is I started to benchmark myself against athletes. And now I might not be an elite athlete, like in terms of my biomarkers and my abilities. But as I started to benchmark against athletes, then I'm like, working towards that, right? What does peak cognition look like? What does like your brain reaction time look like? What does your VO2 max look like? What does your body fat need to be? Like your endurance capabilities, etc. And what happens is when you go to a physician, they benchmark you against the entire sick care scape. And
Right.
even with Function Health, so I use Function Health as well, despite having a concierge physician who charges me $50 for a blood draw. I paid $4.99 for Function Health, and I paid like another $4.99 for Ezra just to understand the experience, right? What the experience is. And the key thing, what's happening here is because they're very mass market. You're being benchmarked against, you're on this bell curve, right? And so if the testosterone of a normal individual today is considered an 80-year-old man 20 years ago, it doesn't matter, right? Your benchmark against these levels that are normal or in range, but are they optimal for peak performance? They're not. And so I think the closest you can get is there's a lot of data on athletes. And my Traction co-founder is building this company called Open Sport. And it's a data company for athletic performance. So I'm like, you know what? I could integrate with them and benchmark entrepreneurs against athletes. And when you benchmark against athletes, you may not get there, but you're like, okay, you know what? I'm under immense pressure, board meetings, need quick reaction times. I need to be able to perform somewhere on that spectrum and not on the sick care spectrum. So then I would rather benchmark against athletes. And maybe I'm not going all in training like that. But let's say an athlete's VO2 max is 70, hypothetically. I may not get to 70, but if I am like 50, 55, I'm at peak for my age. And I think that those things are more important than anything else. And that's why I want to be very deliberate when I build the next thing is how do you pick the market? And for me, the market is easy because Boast, we sold to entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
My Traction community is entrepreneurs. So it only makes sense to sell into that same market.
So it's a no-brainer. And the data are key for your training set, and using athletes is a great concept. Although I'd caution you think in terms of if you're scuba dive, the tables of decompression often built initially off of Navy SEALs who are prime condition, and you don't want to have someone work at that same level that's like obese, not prepared. Unfortunately, entrepreneurs who are way busy are often not the best health state, and it might be a big gap to get them to that baseline. And everyone likes quick fixes, unfortunately, a pill or a supplement, right? And so they want quick routes. And so how do you envision helping them bridge that gap?
I think the most important thing there, again, goes back to the people you pick. Every entrepreneur I know, every good entrepreneur I know, is in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
It's just conveying that message that life and business is a long freaking slog. You may get lucky along the way. You may get lucky and have $1 billion exit like the Instagram guys in a couple of years. You may get lucky and I don't know what happens, and you may hit like a 75 VO2 max, like an ultra triathlete. But the chances are that's not going to happen. It's a lifestyle, business and fitness. And you have to just be consistent. Consistent doesn't mean going intense. A lot of people, what they do is they want short-term fixes. They go high intensity, they blow their load, and they stop. Everything great is built on focusing on it for a long time, and compounding takes place. So I think conveying that is really important, and incorporating a routine that's not taking your whole freaking day, but what can I do every day for an hour combination? What are some basic lifestyle changes I can make in the way I eat, my meal timing, or switching to walking meetings, maybe put a ruck on your body after every meal and you walk and take a Zoom call on it. Things like that. What are those things you can incorporate that have great compounding effects over time?
Right. So I call this the wax on, wax off effect, where you nudge people like in the Karate Kid, he's painting the
Yeah.
fence and then suddenly he's fighting, right? But I guess entrepreneurs have grit, and so they're gonna have that long term perspective often, and they know they have to work at it. But you're an athlete as well, and think about when you right after you came out of the hospital from your double pneumonia scenario with COVID, and you were broken down, right? And I imagine it was tough to kind of get going again, and you had a mindset, I imagine, that you knew you had to take, baby steps and build your way up. And you were, I'm sure, I'm just kind of guessing, you didn't just jump in to start, bench
No,
pressing
I
big
didn't.
numbers. Yeah. But people who've never done that kind of thing, I always come back to exercise. If they're not used to the kind of pain that's associated with even like the most small incremental things, they give up. Right. So, what wax on strategy might you think of that's not necessarily directly associated with brooking and other things, but that could get them to move to that next level where they're able to start rucking?
Exactly. So a few things that's worked for me and many other friends I know, and I think you can programmatically do these things, right? But it's really hard. If you're afraid to suck at something before you get better at it, you may as well not
Yeah.
try. But the one beautiful thing about healthcare, and I say this from a sales connotation, in sales, what always works is FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yeah.
In health, it's not really FUD, right? Because it's real. When your biomarkers are staring you in the face
Right.
and your energy levels are down, and you know that if you keep this up, you're getting fired from your company, which is, what a lot of venture backed founders face, right? You have a lot of problems until you have a health problem. Then you have one problem. And I think the beauty of it is, and I hate saying the beauty of it, but that's the reality, is the biomarkers and the diagnostics can be put together in a way. We talked about the whole hook model, right? Like it's trigger,
Right.
action, variable reward, and invest it. How do you apply the hook model combined with this accruing benefits and then mounting loss to get them invested slow by slow? And it's micro changes. What a lot of people do is they look for like supplementation. Give me a pill. The problem with give me a pill mentality is if your diet and your nutrition and your fundamentals, if your first principles are not right, it will not fix it in the long run. Like you may take these drugs and you may just look gaunt. You may be frail. And so then what? You're going to take one peptide to plug the hole of another and take another drug to plug that hole. So it's like NOS in Fast and the Furious. You drive as fast as you can based on first principles, get the engine tuned up and right, and then you pump the NOS, right? And so I think it's creating micro habits. And two other things that help with the micro habits. One is community. So if you can do it with your spouse,
Right.
or one of your colleagues, I think that's really important. It's the environment matters so much. I keep going back to this, your community or environment. And maybe in some ways it's like partnering with the VCs or partnering with the health company, health insurance company. Like, how do you come up with a plan for the executives so they can keep each other accountable? Having a community, and now with AI, having agents to nudge people like your wife nags at you.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me throw a couple ideas for you to kind of stew on. Because I like as a chemist, I totally get the concept, and often people don't appreciate. Things that you ingest often take a long time to have effects, and people like pills, right? So I know I sat lower on my B12, and it's taken me months to bring it up by taking oral drops. I really load with B12, and I've seen it come up slowly, and it just takes a long time. And people expect immediate with things that they eat and supplements. So timing, like when you do things, is also important. And I'm sitting behind a drum set. Occasionally, I'll see like a beat, and I'm like, I got to learn that. And this notion of failing and I can't do it. I find that at nighttime, almost before bed, if I try it a few times and often slow up, that's key. You got to slow up the pace, kind of get it in there. But the act of sleeping reinforces it. Your brain visualizes you doing things in your sleep, and that's a wax on, wax off strategy, where you're not realizing that it's actually helping you to do that next step thing, that gap jump that I was asking you about.
What's one way you've applied that?
Oh, I like drumming is a perfect example, but also the visualization. Athletes do this all the time. They visualize themselves catching, the Lynn Swan, and they do this often, at nighttime, and then their brain works on that, and then their body performs it more effectively come game time. So that visualization piece is really important, but it's coupled closely with sleep. With respect to what you ingest and community, on chemistry, on the chemistry perspective, the big issue with taking a drug is not only the toxicity, but maintaining that drug in your body at the right time, at the right duration, the right place. It needs to go to the right place. And your body's constantly eliminating stuff. And what you want to have is your internal factories working nonstop. And this is your microbiome. These are internal pharmacies working 24/7. And you stimulate your microbiome with sound, with light, infrared, also community. You see the pig pens. Remember the old peanuts? It's like they're surrounded with microbiome. But when you hang with people, you share microbiome. And so when you talk about these meetups, and as you talk about these athletes for data sets, I would encourage you to try to find ways to get your customer base, entrepreneurs, to somehow also be in the same presence of those athletes, because they will share microbiome. As I said, I always love to hug up. I would, if there's like a superstar athlete, I want to hug them because I want that microbiome to be absorbed. And if you get your 24/7 factories working from a chemistry perspective, you get them to visualize the right time and place, you will do that wax on, wax off thing. Well, you help them nudge effectively to get to these next levels. So those are just my two thoughts I want to throw at you.
No, that's brilliant, because one of the things when I do this next thing is all about integrating. Yeah. So one of the things I want to use a collective of my experiences, right? So my wife being a physician and specialized in ER diagnostics and also preventative. And she's been my first sort of mindset coach physician for a long time, but also use my experience in dealing with entrepreneurs as a advisor, as a board member, as an entrepreneur myself, as a community builder, and bring these aspects together. Healthcare as it stands today is not designed for that. But how do you bring people together? The onboarding shouldn't be just entirely software driven, right? If you look at with these tools, there's no community aspect of it. But imagine a world where you onboard in cohorts and you bring these entrepreneurs together to an exotic place for 5 days for a reset. And they meet like the performance team, which is a physician, a trainer, a nutritionist. Maybe we bring athletes.
Athletes there.
You want athletes. What's funny is at Boast.
But don't let me forget. I got to tell you a story when I hugged this professional football player. But go ahead, keep going.
At Boast, one of the fun things was we hired a lot of athletes, right? We had triathletes on the team. We had 2 Olympians on the team. Our head of sales was Olympian. So I think that's a really important environment, right? And so you bring these people together. So you're not sending them to like random labs to take their diagnostics. You come in We drive you, get all your diagnostics done. We have people prepare your meals. And so you see the ingredients that go into place so you can take it back and either make it yourself or give it to your person to make it. All your supplementation, your training protocols, like it's a really communal vibe. And business is the aftermath of that. And I think there was a fun experiment someone ran not too long ago. They basketed all the stocks of the company CEOs who lifted weights and called it the deadlift ETF. That deadlift ETF outperformed the S&P 500 by 2.5x over the last 4 years or so.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so originally I didn't mean to interrupt you with it, but I definitely have to tell you a story. So I used to work out at this place called Activate, actually owned by a physician, and he'd have these combine folks come in for the college training, but then occasionally there would be some pro athletes that would come in and train, and then those of us weekend warriors were doing our stuff. And there was this one guy who kept just looking over and harassing us, and it got to the point where he and I were just jostling each other. And as they were like departing because they were done with their training, it was Anthony Toribio, a Kansas City chief defensive tackle. He goes, "Come over here," and he grabs me and he hugged me. And I swear it was like iron. I couldn't believe the strength of this guy. And I was just, that to me initially was like, holy crap. I'm not kidding. For 2 weeks, I felt so much more energy. And I'm convinced it was not just because we had sweaty bodies, chest pumping, but it was a microbiome exchange. And I strongly recommend in your community that there be some sort of at least close proximity stuff. It's, to me, fecal transplants are one strategy, go from healthy to sick patient. But if you don't think about that disgusting stuff, getting close and talking, maybe a hug, a handshake at minimum, goes so long way with this kind of microbial exchange. And then again, think in terms of then once you establish that and all the training sets, and initial group of people that you can engage, how are you going to be able to scale that long term? And when you talk about meetups, again, think about music. You were singing on the bus. Music brings people together, right? And in close proximity, aligned by the same beat. And that in itself, if you get the right-minded folk, the right-bodied folk, the right performing folk together and join them together with music, I think you'll facilitate this microbial exchange, which I really think is fundamental.
I completely agree, right? So there is three kinds of community you can build. A community of product, which is what a lot of people do, where they're talking about the product and improving. But the other two kinds is one is a community of practice where we're learning to get better at some skill or craft or trade. And the last one is a community of play where
Yeah.
people come together to have fun. And I think you got to infuse a community of practice with a community of play. And a big part of play is music, right? In my book, I mentioned it a couple of times. It's called From Grassroots to Greatness, 13 Rules to Build Iconic Brands with Community-Led Growth. One of the principles I talked about was called camper. How do you build long-lasting cultures? And camper, as cheesy as it may sound, it stands for connection, autonomy, mastery, purpose, energy, and recognition. Energy is a big part of it, right? Imagine going to a conference and you're like super energized, and a boring speaker comes and like your energy is down and you're like in your phone. At these events, music festivals or like wellness events, run clubs, you're hugging it out. You're just like in the emotion. You're exchanging, I guess, sweat, tears,
Yeah.
hugs, all
Yeah.
kinds of things. And I think that gives you a very positive vibe that you carry on for a long time. You look at Burning Man, for example, or you look at any sporting event, right? I think that exchange is really important. And that's why I'm a big believer of community and environment. If you want to build $1 billion company, go live in Silicon Valley. Not because you can't build one outside, you can, but the sheer volume of people, right? And the proximity is a huge cheat code for the reasons why you said you'll exchange your gut microbiome by just hugging people half a dozen times a week.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And then, so with respect to supplements and things like that, actually, I have a great collaboration that I've done in the past, and I'm actually, ironically, just started another discussion with this professor in India, in Nirma. We did some sound science, sound and effects on microbiome, but we're also looking now to look at various natural substances that you could use, that you could ingest for antibacterial agents and other things. And we were just talking just earlier this week about turmeric. And people recognize in India and elsewhere that turmeric is a very valuable spice. But when they purify out curcumin, the alleged active ingredient, it's not as effective. You need the whole chorus of compounds that is nature put together in this form of turmeric that is much more beneficial from a health perspective. So you need a great combination and not spiked, very concentrated forms of Huberman suggested supplements. You need to have the right foods, right combinations that nature has optimized over eons. And so that's, as you talk about the food element into your platform, I would definitely try to leverage that as much as possible.
Definitely. I think Mark Hyman says this a lot, but I truly believe food is medicine,
Yep.
right? And I come from a culture where it is believed that or thought of, right? Like although my wife's a physician, every time there's some ailment at home, my mom has some remedy that's in food. And I don't know what it is, but I've also found through periods of stress, I've had like IBS for
Yeah.
24 months
Really
of
common,
stress.
right.
And honestly, just by changing the things I eat and the timing of it has made a huge difference in my metabolic health. I have near zero visceral fat based on my last
DEXA?
based on my last DEXA, something like less than a pound.
Yeah, I've been there
Less,
too. I got the same elite level. Well, I've got 15 years on you, but it's okay.
I don't know, man. I also come from a culture where 45 is considered very old. When I look at pictures of my parents always tell me like, why are you pushing yourself so much? You don't want to hurt yourself. I'm like, it's the opposite, right? Because when I look at pictures of my parents, my family members at 45, they looked very different. You're saying you're 15 years older than me. You look like you're in your early 40s.
No,
But
you're being kind.
no, I'm serious.
Yeah, nowhere.
With a bald head, shaved beard, but like the appearance, your skin is tight and you're having fun, you're playing music and that whole vibe. And I feel like I come from a culture where you got to act your age, you got to act old to command the respect. And that means looking a little chubbier, having gray hair, dressing older, those kinds of things, maybe having a mustache and a belly. And not overextending yourself. And so my parents often, aren't you working out too much? What is going on? Why do you need to have all this? And I'm like, because that's the new 45-year-old. I don't know. But a big part is explain to them that their diets are rooted in metabolic dysfunction, especially the Indian diet and what they eat. And that's why they age faster, their skin sags faster, the elasticity leaves. Indian diets are predominantly high carb,
Yeah.
high starches, a lot of processed food, and low protein, which is not good for muscle retention, skin elasticity, etc. And so then if you look at, I guess if you look at just take a snapshot of Facebook history of what just people are eating based on what they post,
Right.
you can actually probably predict that what kind of ailments they'll have, right? And a lot of it is metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance.
Right.
That's not the leading indicator though, right? That's like the symptom now of being diabetic. But what's really happening is what is the leading indicator is you ate like crap and you never worked out.
Yeah. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned Facebook. I think I mentioned this in our last conversation. Zuckerberg sits on a pile of incredibly valuable information that he just doesn't get. I've seen pictures of people posting weeks, months, years of their diets, and then they have a medical condition, and it's pretty clear those can be strongly correlated. It's just a no-brainer to me. But I want to talk about the Indian diet. Actually, with this researcher, Vijay Kothari, we were just talking about ashwagandha, this supplement that people take. In itself, it's by itself can be very dangerous if it's pulled from the leaves. You need to take it from the roots. But the traditional Indian medicine folks boil the roots and extract the root extracts. And those are what are actually the most valuable medicinally. And I was just talking with them. Look, it's not just the chorus of compounds. Again, I think it's the dirt and the bacteria that's associated with the roots that's also pretty important. And so we're exploring that because he's also a bacteriologist. But it's interesting because, again, we often look at the wrong things. And I might have told you the story. Vitamin C, Linus Pauling won 2 Nobel Prizes, I think, did he? But he was big on vitamin C near the end of his life. And in terms of it being just almost a cure all, the early days of vitamin C purification was from paprika. And there was just a small contaminant in the vitamin C, otherwise pure form. But it was the contaminant from paprika, polyphenols, that actually has been later established to being why it was so effective. And people were overlooking that because they're looking at the most concentrated piece. But often the nature chorus of compounds, which often bacteria produce and others, it's often the key element. So there might be in the Indian diet, where you look at the healthy populations within India, there might be a lot of just not just the lack of protein scenario, more protein, and not just overwhelmed starch scenario. It might be literally like in the dirt, right? A lot more true nature element in the farm to table kind of thing.
Possibly, because my dad was a farmer. Now, here's the thing. I never spent any real time in India. So whatever I know is from like piecemealing through vacations there. My parents and my dad left in his teens, but nonetheless, he grew up as a farmer on farmland, and they were all super healthy. But despite having a high carbohydrate diet, high starches, lentils and rice, a lot of what they ate is because they walked in sun all day in the fields. So they were burning calories. They were inherently walking like 30,000 steps a day.
Yeah.
That'll do it. Our lives, even if you go to the gym for an hour and you do 30 minutes of zone 2 cardio after doing weight training, you're still sedentary because we're sitting all day.
Yeah.
We're sitting all day. And so, like, how do you get that level of activity? Since I started focusing on fitness, one of the things I noticed is your like non-exercise thermogenic activity.
Yeah.
And I started being very deliberate about raising that. And when I started to do that, I realized now, even if I eat obscene amount of calories, like on the weekends, I don't eat crap. Like I just have this crazy appetite. So if I go on the weekend, I'll eat like maybe a pound of steak. Pound of steak is probably like over 1,000 calories and 100 plus grams of protein. So like on the weekends, I eat 5,000 calories each day. I am way over my daily maintenance calories, right? So I eat almost 500 calories to 700 calories in surplus for the last 6 months or 5 months. I haven't put on any weight.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Because first of all, your brain burns a ton, and yours is always firing. Muscles are definitely burning. It's a good way I usually measure calorie is technically in science, the energy required to raise the temperature of a small cubic centimeter of water kind of thing. I do cold plunges, right? And so when I get in the cold plunge, I look at the temperature when I go in. And even though it's actually still being cooled with circulation, I have a plunge that does that. I watch the temperature go up and how much I can raise the temperature in 5 minutes when I'm in the cold plunge. And the days that I know that I'm just crushing it is when I could just start at 50 and I get out in a few minutes and it's like 54. It's really cool. Literally, right? But that's a direct way of measuring sometimes if you consider a cold plunge.
Yeah, I do cold plunges. At least I used to do it religiously.
Yeah.
But now I do a lot more sauna. And when I'm in stress or like something is bothering me,
Put it out.
I'll probably sit in the sauna for an hour and a half, like 15-minute sessions, come out, chill for a bit, 15-minute sessions. I think there, put myself in that duress. I did 8 or 9 minutes in the cold plunge once and I almost got like hyperthermia.
Yeah, it's a little too much. It's
It- it-
about the change. I'm sorry. It's about the change because being in the sauna at a certain temperature for too long is actually just not as effective as going through the interval training kind of thing where you get in, sweat, come out, take a cold shower, get back in, rinse and repeat, literally. And so with cold plunges, starting very hot and to get very cold is a quick differential. And it's been shown that you get out and you kind of naturally warm up and then get back in and then get out and get back in, it's really effective. But so that's again, it's like the first derivative here. We're talking about change. But that's why like pure aerobic training is often not good for you because you get to this point, you just stay at that. And that's not, you want to be able to accelerate and stop and deaccelerate. Accelerate, stop. It's just like that Japanese form of walking where you walk really fast and then walk really slow. It's very effective.
Yeah, I recently saw a study on that, and I probably do some version of that walking because I go on these long, hour and a half long walks before I sleep, about half an hour before I sleep. And I live in this area full of hills, so I'll walk really fast and then and slow down, kind of thing. So I think I was naturally doing some of that without timing. But the cold plunges I used to do religiously 4 or 5 times a week. It's tapered down to like once a week. Maybe I should bring it back up.
No, in
Uh,
fact, that's better because you become cold adapted and you want to not do it every day, which is what I was doing as well. I stop once in a while for a day and then come back. And it's so much better for you, I think, doing that.
yeah, I don't think you can get heat adapted though, because I've been doing this like sauna routine, and the sauna I go to is so hot. I don't think it's like physically possible for me to stay in there beyond 15 minutes.
It is pretty stressful. Hey, so I know we weren't going long, but I wanted to ask you one other question because you touched on it. If you want to really hit it, you don't need to, but it's Silicon Valley is a great place to be. It's got the multiple university network. I went to Cal Berkeley, and there's UCSF, and then Stanford, and then other bunch of universities. It's just a very cerebral ferment. Fantastic. You moved to Austin, and there's elements of that. But I just heard from a real estate agent today that Austin's real estate market is just getting crushed. It's just not a great market. Do you like it there? Would you ever consider moving back?
Bay Area will always be my home and home base. Everything else is transient. After my COVID incident, and the reason why I consider the Bay Area home is built our careers there. My wife and I. My wife did her fellowship at Stanford, moved up the ranks. She's still a professor of medicine there, and she flies back and forth because she's not going to leave the Stanford gate. Our community is there. Our closest, deepest friends. We moved there I think she was in her 20s. I was in my late 20s or like early 30s or something. And it's been 15 years there. So everything we know in life and business has been formulated by that. And prior to moving to the Bay Area, all my life in college was spent thinking about how do I move to Silicon Valley.
Oh,
It's really funny
yeah.
is my wife had a number of opportunities on the East Coast, great hospitals after she finished med school. And I begged and forced her to move to apply to universities in California and especially in the Bay Area. I'm like, listen, there's no startup ecosystem here. It sucks. Like New York, New Jersey, which is where I started my career, had no real startup scene. My wife was going to Rutgers, doing medical school there, and then did her residency at Drexel in Philly. And I kept begging her, and she didn't want to. She's like, your parents live in Toronto. My parents live in New Jersey. All our college friends are here. Why go there? And I'm like, this is not my jam. I want to be in that circle of innovation and trajectory, right? Around high trajectory, fast pace, high velocity, high trajectory people. And she told me, I'm going to apply to one university. And if I get in, we're in. And by the way, it's Stanford and they don't take a lot of outsiders. And luck would have it, she got in. So my life has been a series of lucks and she got in and we grew by osmosis. I think being in a certain environment, you may not be a zuck, but the downside is not bad either, right? If the options are you have financial independence or you be a zuck or somewhere on that spectrum, there's opportunity there. Whatever. I think most people, at the very least in the Bay Area, are SDM, single digit millionaires.
Yeah.
That's the downside. That's not the downside for rest of America, unfortunately. That's the upside that people aspire to. So I think after the health incident with me, and I left the day-to-day of the company shortly thereafter, we went to Dubai, which was fun. It was a great sabbatical. My wife had nonstop, never taken a break since university, like med school. Firstly, she did a dual BA/MD program. So she got into med school in second year of undergrad. And so has been at it for a long time. So we wanted a break. We went to Dubai. And then her brother and his kids and her mom live in San Antonio. So we said, we'll give Austin a shot. It's nice here. It's on the lake where we live. Like literally, my backyard, I can go and start paddleboarding. So it's great. The kids like it here. Austin's a very fit city. People are nice, good food culture. To me, though, depends on what you want in life, right? Bay Area is special and unbeatable with any amount of money for
Yeah.
these reasons. Number one, the majority of the people in the Bay Area are abundance minded. They openly give their time, money, everything. When I first moved to the Bay, I cold emailed a couple billionaires and they actually invited me. I don't know how, but they invited me to private dinners. You just have to ask, and people will open doors, abundance minded. The opposite of that is scarcity minded. I find outside the Bay Area, people are more scarcity. They hold their cards to their chest. They want NDAs, all this other BS. They don't openly share. In the Bay Area, people are very open. The second is growth minded. And that means two things. One is moving with high velocity. And two, failure is not a limiter. It's an opportunity. It's what you learn. And you'll see people who have failed and have disastrous failures have come on to go raise more money than ever. And so that growth minded is the second one, which ties to, again, your failure doesn't hold you back. There's no shame in taking risk, move with high velocity. And the third one, which is extremely hard to find, but you see it all over the Bay Area, is the distinction between good people and nice people. And it took a long time for me to realize, but I've spent the last couple of years in many cities outside the Bay, embedded, inhaling the culture. And nice people prioritize being liked. They tell you what you want to hear.
Right.
Good people tell you what you need to hear. It may hurt, it may feel harsh, but it's good for you in the long run. And you see a lot of athletes. I always make this similarity between athletes and entrepreneurs. When athletes are successful, they start to hang around with a lot of nice people who tell them what they want to hear. They prioritize being liked. Oh, you did it all by yourself. F the coach. And then their downward spiral starts with the entourage. So I think it's really important, if you want to be successful in any business venture, at least, to be surrounded by abundance minded plus growth minded plus good people. And you can throw a rock in the Bay Area and you'll find that combo. You'll throw a rock anywhere in the world and you won't. And
Yeah.
there's a reason for that, is because most cultures are driven by famines and wars. And so they're naturally like scarcity minded and fixed minded and taught to be nice, put your head down, don't question the status quo. In the Bay Area, rewarded for questioning the status quo.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you nailed it. Actually, to add into your good, and then let you run. But oh, God, I have so much to chat about down the road. But added to good, high integrity, and
Yes.
when we lived up there, some of the to give you an idea, I think I may have mentioned this to you. Some of the early investors, they literally cut a check, said, "Send me a sig page." They didn't even see the. I didn't even see the contract, the investment. They invested in people, and they expect that you behave that way. And that's how I always behave. I haven't exited from my company yet, which I'm a failure as CEO in that regard. But I work so hard to try to find an exit for just some of the investors that are just so immense. That term, I don't know if it means anything to you, but to me, it's just do the right thing. And I never ever want to screw anyone. I get pissed when someone screws me, and that's a whole nother game.
I do as well. And I think you hit the nail there. Integrity. Now, there's bad actors in every community, but I'll tell you one thing. I've never met a larger volume of high integrity people as much as I have in the Bay Area.
That's exactly.
Like Dubai, there's a lot of integrity, I guess, by function of, if you steal, you're going to jail and they're going to chop your hand so you can leave your wallet on the table. But what I'm talking about, like integrity, tell you what's in their mind and not beat around the bush, tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And also trust in the relationship. And like you, I've been in a situation, in a crappy co-founder situation, where weeks after raising millions of dollars, was co-founder was trying to steal the money, investor money, who put like money on a safe, millions of dollars on a safe. I can't talk much about it, but investors are like, Lloyd, I guess they could have written it off, right? Like all investors do, but this was literally a couple of weeks after the wire hit the bank account. And my only thing was, I'm going to get you guys back the money.
Exactly.
You wrote the money on my name
Yeah.
on a safe, and that's what holds. And despite the threats and the legal threats and the defamation and the family attacks, I stood by it, went through the case. The judge saw it at the first hearing, is returned the money, put an end to this BS. Can't
Yeah.
work together. It's fine. But like, you can't say safe investors have no rights to their millions of dollars when you literally were a nobody in the fundraising process, no venture experience. And then you try to blackmail the CEO so you can work with your husband to run the company and keep the money. And especially when investors say, we gave the money on his name, you guys can't work together, just give us our money back. We'll move on. And then you turn around and say, no, investors have no rights, especially when you're not the CEO, when you didn't raise the money. So the thing is, I've realized now, you got to you can do any number of things, right? There's a difference between growing pains and being stupid.
Yeah.
Growing pains is you take on difficult tasks and they make you stronger, like you lift heavier weights in the gym. So the analogy being, the stupidity analogy of it is, say you can lift 50-pound dumbbells. Now you go and lift 55 tomorrow, 65, you'll eke out maybe 5 reps less, but you'll be stronger for it. Now you can barely lift 55 and you go and try to bang out 100-pound dumbbells and you break your shoulder. That wasn't growing pain. You were stupid. And so a lot of the times what I've now realized is my mistakes have not been growing pains. These mistakes are like stupidity, because the logical thing is, I'm in the Bay Area. I know everyone. Why partner with people who are outside of there unless you have a long-standing working relationship? Because, okay, like the law of averages says, and all the people are abundance-minded, growth-minded, good people, right? There's high integrity. So don't make it difficult for yourself. A lot of like entrepreneurs starting out, oh, what should I do? They circle the drain in the same community with the same 5 angel investors who keep dragging them. And they keep asking, what do I do? I'm like, if you can't make it and you've spent like 5 years here and you have nothing to lose other than your sanity, why don't you just go to the Bay Area? Because at least you have removed one element of stupidity, which is you're just making it harder for yourself. Right. So building a business is hard anyway. So remove the things that are just roadblocks, right? And so one of them is your environment, whether that's moving to the Bay Area or finding an environment of entrepreneurs who are pushing much above you and they're mentors and they're spending time with you, and just sheer by hugging them, you get their microbiome, you're reaching higher. And if that opportunity doesn't exist, I think you're a young person, move to a city where the sheer volume of people makes it easy to throw a rock and find that kind of person. It's like trying to make it in Hollywood from like Arkansas. Now, maybe you could get lucky, but the chances are you'll get luckier faster by moving to LA.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're spot on there. Hey, again, big guy. This is fantastic. Love to keep our discussions going offline. We'll definitely want to talk about some of these other things that I've been brewing on that might be highly relevant for you with your platform. And hey, awesome. Thanks. To see you. I've probably taken you from your family for way too long today, huh?
No worries, man. Fortunately, I've been spending a lot of time with them, so this is fine. This is fine. And my wife was speaking at a med conference over the weekend, so I was hanging out with the kids. And what's really interesting is the last 15 years or so as an entrepreneur, my wife did the work, brought the money and managed the kids, and I had just one job, and eventually got lucky. And so now it's my turn to make up for lost time. But thank you so much. This has been phenomenal, and let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely, man.